Okay, moving on to part 4 here on the Hyksos. And I'm sorry this is getting drawn out more than it probably should. But then again, we want to know all this information and go through it correctly. And probably somebody to interpret it that's been through it about 30 times. So, in every aspect of this. So here we are at the Hyksos, and they're known kings that were during that time and rulers. Now, Manetho's history of Egypt is only known through the works of others, such as Against Apion by Flavius Josephus, the Jewish scholar, and these sources do not list the name of 6 rulers in the same order. To complicate matters further, the spellings are so distorted that they are useless for chronological purposes. There is no close or obvious connection between the bulk of these names. The first supposed to have been Saltielus, Beon or Banon, Apakanan or Paknan, Anis or Stan, which Stan is there, Apophis, Assis, like Hassis, or Assis, like Assisi, or Archles, which is very Greek sounding, almost like Hercules, but Archcules, like Archimedes, Archles, and the Egyptian names that appear on scarabs and other objects. The Turin Kings list affirms that there were 6 Hyksos rulers, but only 4 of them are clearly attested as Hyksos kings from the surviving archaeological or textual records. Sakir Har, Kion, Apophis, and Kamudi. Now, Kion and Apepi, or Pepi, are by far the best attested kings of his dynasty, whereas Sakir Har is attested only by a single door jamb from Avaris that bears his royal tituli. And Avaris is, of course, where they show it at the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that's where he is digging at to end up finding it. 2 Hyksos pharaohs remain unknown. Many scholars have suggested that they were Maebrisishi, Aper Anath, Saminquinu, Sek and Hari, Yakbim, or Masare Yakub Har, and Yakub Har is Jacob. They have him listed as Yakub Har and Yakub Baal, and it shows you that they had that other religion come into it with off of Anan, Saturn, and so on, who are all attested by seals or scarabs in the Delta region. And so they have all those scarabs and seals in the Delta region, but nobody wants to give them the names because they're not sure which one's which and in what order. So they leave it alone, and they give you 4, and they have all of these extra names, and it's way more than 6. But thus far, all is certain is that they were Asiatic kings in Egypt's Delta region. They could either be the remaining 2 Hyksos kings or were members of the previous 14th dynasty at Zos. So, or at Sais, is maybe what they're talking about there. Range. The Hyksos kingdom was centered in the eastern Nile Delta in Middle Egypt, and it was limited in size, never extending south into Upper Egypt, which was under the control of the Theban-based rulers at the time, except briefly for about 3 years at the end of Kion's reign and the beginning of Apophis' reign. The Hyksos 15 dynasty rulers established their capital and seat government at Avaris, like we were saying. The rule of these kings overlaps with that of native Egyptian pharaohs of the 16th and 17th dynasties. So we can't count it as being a full lineage, but this was going on when that was going on. Quite often in the intermediate periods when there weren't exactly one rulers, this happened also. People say it drastically changes timelines, and they can't figure it out at all on what exactly is the truth of every timeline. And it's because they fudge certain ones of them to make other ones disappear for some reason. Some pharaohs are shown to have only lived 8 years and so on like that, and they still got included. So it makes you wonder why they were inclusive and why they were not inclusive and so on of them, and just what they did. For some of the things that happened, we've kind of found out about now. You know, like Akhenaten and how he changed the religion to monotheism style and everything in the first place, and stuff, but this was all hidden. But there are others that you'll never find out about because they don't even tell you that there was this heretic. They just don't tell you. Damnatio Horae, it's where it takes the memory of these people and it is gone forever. Damnatio Memoriae. So, the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, Ahmose, finally expelled the Hyksos from their last hideout at Shahurin in Gaza by the 16th year of his reign. The independent native rulers in the Thebes do seem, however, to have reached a practical modus vivendi. That's a way of living. Modus vivendi is like a mode of life. Viva. So it's really, they found a way of living with the later Hyksos rulers. This included transit rights through Hyksos-controlled Middle and Lower Egypt, pasturage rights in the Fertile Delta. One text, the Carnarvon Tablet, relates the misgivings of the Theban rulers' council of advisors when Kamose proposed moving against the Hyksos, so they went against it, who he claimed were a humiliating stain upon the holy land of Egypt. That was Kamose that said that, and the counselors clearly did not wish to disturb the status quo. They said on the tablet, "We are at ease in our part of Egypt. Elephantine at the first cataract is strong, and the middle of the land is with us as far as Kusay near modern Asud. The sleekest of their fields are plowed for us, and our cattle are pasteurized in the delta. Emmer wheats are sent for our pigs. Our cattle have not been taken away by them. He holds the land of the Asiatics. We hold Egypt." I'd like to see if that was Egypt or Kemet at that time off of it, but he tells you that he holds the land of the Asiatics, and what's odd about that is that they've basically given up the delta to the idea it was Asiatics. In fact, he says it was their land. This makes you think that maybe when the two lands got together, that one of them was decidedly listed as being more of an Asiatic type person from the other people that had been there longer, and they had tenure in that area. And so whenever it went together, Upper and Lower Egypt and so on, could be possible. But it also shows you that they really weren't screwing everything up. In fact, we know now that they brought them the ability to have their final dynasties and go through the very end of it, or they would have been taken out a long time ago, from getting the chariots, from getting the compound bows, the new axes, the other weapons, and so on, that is shown that comes directly from them. Pardon me. King Tut even was buried with a suit of armor that looks very Proto-Indo-European and scale-like. It's a leather armor, but it's made to look like scales itself. It's kind of neat. I'll have to show you that in the Tut reveal that I do here shortly on some new things that they found, and it's really not new. They had all of these things for years, but they've just never been out of the back basement. And I'm only going to go through a few of the different ones that they have out of all of it, but it's the ones that I feel like are important to make my point, to show you certain things that went on. It would appear as though the Hyksos administrators were accepting in the most quarters, if not actually supported by many of their northern Egyptian subjects. So they're saying the Hyksos people were accepted and supported. Not until the beginning of the Theban Wars of Liberation during the 17th dynasty are the Theban warriors again found in the Fayum area. Some texts indicate that while the Hyksos controlled the Delta region administratively, the Thebans were too busy mining gold and making money off the Red Sea trade to even care. It said something about that earlier. Lower Egypt and Thebes function autonomously and shared limited contact with each other. The relationship with the Egyptians. Scholars have taken the increasing use of scarabs and the adoption of some Egyptian forms of art by the 15th dynasty Hyksos kings and their wide distribution as an indicating of their becoming progressively Egyptianized. The Hyksos used Egyptian titles associated with traditional Egyptian kingship, took the Egyptian god Set or Seth to represent their own tutelary deity. The native Egyptians viewed the Hyksos as non-Egyptian invaders. When they were eventually driven out of Egypt, all traces of their occupation were erased. But Set was already taken by a lot of people. Ramses and all of the Ramses families, and Seth, or Seti, as you know him as, were redheads already, and there are more that are listed down through the ages, and then these blondes too. Now, people try to say that that was done during the embalming process, and I'm sure they're not going to go into that here, so let me go right here real quick. This is an Ancient Origins article, but it's one that I even did a video on 2 years ago now. But here's this ancient Egyptian boy with blonde hair. Fairly straight, but you can tell they combed it out and stuff, but he died early here. There's Anubis, the statuary, and so on. And new research shows that some ancient Egyptians were naturally fair-haired. According to Dr. Janet Davey from the Victorian Institute for Forensic Medicine, Australia, some Egyptians were naturally blonde and red hair. Her research has brought an answer to an intriguing connection connected with Egyptian mummies and the effects of the mummification process. People believed up until that point that the hair wasn't all their hair was either dark or brown, until most researchers had claimed that the different colors of the mummy hair were a result of the mummification process itself. But they actually took Ramses' hair and checked it out, and it was red in its early ages and stuff, and the genetics showed that to him too, so there was really no question. And you can take any person's type of hair and put it under a microscope, and within a second or two, people that know what they're looking at can tell you exactly what's going on and if this is a Caucasian and what type of people they are in the first place. But they can also, by the core or the stalk of your hair, the follicle inside of itself, tell you what the natural coloring was going to be, because people's hair that turns gray in the follicle still is keeping some of its normal color, and it puts out a gray hair as it's later. Ramses was in his 90s, so he colored his hair back to the color of his youth with henna. So she did experiments in which she accomplished the sport of her friend, a retired industrial chemist named Alan Elliott. They prepared natron. They used 16 hair samples. Natron was that salt that was used in the mummification process, and it's been called supposed color change. After she did her deal, there was literally no color change whatsoever. Then we look at somebody like Thuya and Yuya. This is the grandparents of King Tut himself, and he's a blonde-haired man, and he looks kind of like Abraham Lincoln. And that's not the greatest picture of him, and you find that whenever pictures are made, and in fact in that Tut drama I'll show you, where when they film him, they don't want you to catch his yellow hair. They want you to scoot over just enough to where you catch his features, but not the hair. And people are always worried about the darkening of the skin. Bob Breyer did a mummy out of this pale person that they did, and he still turned beef jerky dark. And that they didn't even put the shellac stuff over the top of him or anything else. So it pretty much showed you that. So there's Thuya, and this is Yuya, his wife, and she's also blonde-haired. And they're kind of barely, you can see it right there, but they both have that blonde, light-colored hair. She left him in the salty powder for 40 days, and which is the duration. They did the same thing like it, as if it would have been in a mummy, and all different types of hair. Black people, old people, young people, different colors of hair. Even reds and blonde hair, and they wanted just to see what changes it would do to it. Some of them were brown or chestnut type and auburn, and they thought, well, if you take all the brown out of auburn, it's still got a red cast. Is this where the red's coming from or what? And they noted out of all the samples that were there, Not a single one of them changed one single shade. In my other deal, it shows this woman and the color scale that's on there and how different it could be from a light brown to a dark brown and all these numbers, and it didn't change a single one. Like when they show your teeth and all the going to white and da-da-da, no, it didn't change. And that's the reason that even though everybody got done this way, there are still black-haired people, brown-haired people, auburn-haired people, red and blonde-haired, is because that's what they were. Very much like what you'd see in Europe today, where you can see all these different hair types, color types. Along with that, their eyes go with the same way. I've shown the blue-eyed Egyptians in the other video here. Ramses himself, soft, curly, reddish type hair, an old man. So, fair hair color. And if you think that they're, they say, well, sure, those blonde-haired people came in later because the Greeks, and it's like, no, this way who does that? And they go, oh, well, no, it's the Hyksos. And they go, well, it's before and after, and they kicked them out. So all of a sudden, everybody just, no, it looks like it was separated enough for everybody to realize what's going on. Worse than that, though, they found the necropolis that's there up in the center area is separated blonde-haired people in one area, red-haired people in another, auburn and dark-haired people in another, and there's a substantial amount of blonde and red-haired mummies out of it. So they say, well, this is more of a natural type thing. Their Wallace E. Budge, very famous Egyptologist at the end of the 19th century, exhibited in the British Museum. They have a mummy is nicknamed the Ginger, due to the color of his hair. Ginger's supposed to be a red hair, and this man is really more of a strawberry blonde to really blonde. I'll show you a picture in a second. The man was mummified naturally without the use of natron. He was just submitted into sand and then desiccated. So it's a natural mummy to say. The mummy of the Ginger sheds light on the very early Egypt history and suggests that people who created the Egyptian civilization were started at red and blonde hair too. And so here's Ginger the Gibelline mummy. And he's set up in a situ situation where it looks like just like when they had found him and stuff. Red ochre burial, curly golden locks of hair, and there are lots of light areas on his skin, but he's soaked into damage and darkness over that type of effect. But you can see they didn't shellac him or anything like that. This is way before it. And they didn't have everything worked out in the very start of it. There are progressions to it. A lot of people think Egypt, boing, and they had it all going on, but the pantheons grew. But a lot of people don't know the Greek pantheon kind of grew too. It didn't just go boing. We look back at it and we go, oh, it was all there. And it was like, well, it wasn't all there to start. Remember, they have a Titan set up, and then Titan Monarchy, and this, that, and the other. You can imagine that they pretty much worshiped these people, and then it all changed. And the change is the showing of the changing of the guard of some of these people and their languages and writing, like Greek comes from Phoenician and Hebrew comes from Phoenician and so on, right? We still use it to this day. So they talked about the Hittite princess Zananza, who was sent from Hattusha to Thebes to marry Princess Akhamamun. Had light skin and hair. The father of more powerful Queen Tai was blonde as well, Yuya, which we just showed you a minute ago, and he really looks like Abraham Lincoln with blonde hair. It's amazing. But they had other ones that are shown through the time that have blonde hair. One of the famous queens of the 4th dynasty is shown to have had blonde hair. There are people in her retinue and in the 7th and 8th dynasty that showed some red-headed women that are part of apparently Hathar's funeral. Here we have this burials, and there's a red head that's in it, and these burials that are in this necropolis that Brigham Young University in Utah has gone through, and they found males that are large, over 7 foot tall. An infant child that was discovered wearing a tunic and jewelry. Unique groupings of burials clustered according to hair color, including blonde and red-haired mummies. And we can just pretty much say, yep, that's from the origin all the way through, and it wasn't something new that was brought into there. It's the same people, as I've been stating over and over again. And so now we can see the reality of it, that they always were blonde, red-haired, blue-eyed, Caucasian, so sure some green, oh sure some brown auburn hair and stuff. Queen Ty is um, shown with long, curly auburn hair in her mummy and stuff. They look at that one statue that's made out of yew wood, and yew is like pine. Whenever it starts out, it's real light colored, but then it darkens over time. But also, what they try to call a fro on her head is really a silver doily on top of a pharaoh's headdress. They've proven this even through CAT scans, and you can see it. But that thing on top, if you look at it, is really a mesh of silver, like a doily, like she's got some towel or doily over her head, you know. Beautiful princess type thing going on. Anyhow, they tell you that the native Egyptians viewed the Hyksos as a non-Egyptian invaders, regardless of genetics that they were unaware of. If you speak a different language or do different things, back then Caucasians were fighting with each other, all the way past the point that they grew around and the snake bit its own tail. And then a realization was made. The Bible was used as a finalization, and there was supposed to have been more, but we lost the whole fact that it went to the Romans. And then whenever Rome fell under, they just turned it into the Roman Catholic Church. It still exists to this day. I'm not going to go deep into that aspect of it, but you can see that that's what happened. And the second coming was Titus at 73 AD. Just like Jesus said, one generation, some of you here today will still be when the second coming comes. And it did. Under Sennacherib Tau, which they show his head right here, let's take a look at that real quick. You can see there are wounds that are protruding into his jaw and his head, and an axe mark that's on it. Even though he's been mummied up, his mummy was not done well in any way, shape, or form, indicating that the priest didn't have everything right. It wasn't a well done mummy at all. But then again, he has Caucasian hair on the side of his head. I believe it has a reddish tinge to it too, but it's like that dark brown, reddish hair, kind of auburn, if you will. Not the normal color of a ginger or bright blonde or a strawberry blonde. Sennacherib Tower into the contact with these Hyksos contemporaries in the north, and he led the army that was down there and ended up getting killed messing with them, but he started off them expulsing them out of Egypt. The tradition took form of a tale in which the Hyksos king Apepi sent a message to Sennacherib Thebes to demand that the Theban sport of harpooning hippopotami be done away with. This excuse was that the noise of these beasts was such that he was unable to sleep in faraway Arbaris, which is not true. And they wanted to keep hippopotamuses pretty much out of the situation, along with crocodiles. They can't be having people going into the water and stuff and having that around. So this was a tradition that they'd always had. And weird thing though, it kind of goes with the Hyksos leaders. And so that's where they make a mention of it. The real reason was probably that their main god was Set, who was represented as part man, part hippopotamus. Actually, Set looked like he's aardvark. That doesn't look like a hippopotamus, but there are the other gods that have it. Jan Assmann argues that because ancient Egyptians could never conceive of a lonely god lacking personality, Set, the desert god, who was worshipped exclusively, according to the tale, represented a manifestation of evil. Perhaps the only historical information that can be gleaned from the tale is that Egypt was a divided land, the area of direct Hyksos control being in the north, but the whole of Egypt possibly paying tribute to the Hyksos kings. But in the statement earlier where it said that they graze our flocks, they give us all of our food for our pigs and stuff, they give us the emmer wheats that they've brought, they've got this, they've got that and everything, why are you want to rock the boat? Things are going great right now, and we just got all this new weapons and everything, and they go, okay, let's kick them out now that we got their stuff. Something like that. And even though I know the heritage of all of this, it's still kind of sad that Egypt got taken over and just got caught at a weak time, you know? And it happened again a couple of times, and it started the fall of Egypt, but it's still kind of sad that, you know, they couldn't keep it together just perfectly all the way through. But if they did, then we would not be in the world that we are today either. So Sakari was an active diplomat doing diplomatic posturing, which probably it consisted of more than simply exchanging insults with the Asiatic ruler of the north. He seems to have led military skirmishes against the Hyksos, and judging by the vicious head wounds on his mummy in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, he may have died during one of them. It says that this is another case where it needs a citation. You just saw the picture there, and that's all that's known about it, is that he's one of the ones that started the fight, and he got killed during it, so I don't know why you would need one. His son and successor Kamos, of the ruler of the 7th dynasty at Thebes, is credited with the first significant victories in the Theban war led against the Hyksos, and that's tabulated too. Maybe they just want the citation. They just want, you know, there's their thing where it's got to have an ibid, got to have a citation, got to have a thing, got to have a thing. I grew real tired of that towards the end of my tenure and stuff, and studies, and long time ago I got tired of doing papers along that route and everything, and I you know, not to sound cocky, but I'm a source, and I just go off of that. Kamos sailed from the north to Thebes and led his army third against his regnal year. He surprised and overran the southernmost garrison at the Hyksos at Nefrusi, just north of Kusei, near modern Isut. Kamos had led his army to as far north as the neighboring Avaris itself. Although the city was not taken, the fields around it were devastated by the Thebans, so they destroyed their property around there too. A second stele discovered at Thebes continues the account of the war broken off in the Carnarvon tablet that we were talking about earlier, and mentions the interception and capture of a courier bearing a special message for a Pepe at Avaris to his ally, the rulers of the kingdom of Kush. Now, everybody says the Kush are the Nubians, but they're not. They're actually viceroys that were set in place from old dynasties, that people that didn't become kings because on princes and so on were set to this, and they were ended up putting as viceroys over it, and a blend of people comes out of that. That's in modern Sudan. You can look at Kushite coins, and it shows you that these people look very much like that other coin that I showed you before, very much a Persian-y, Caucasian, very much looking guys that they have to them, and these are their coins. Also, the statues of that time shows you the same thing, and their answer for this is that they stole the statues of other pharaohs and took them up there to do that once they realized all that. But black people still try to say, well, look at them, they're dark, and it's like there's a lot of dark statues, and there's Ka statues. Ka statues are meant to be something like showing Osiris. So if you're gonna, you know, they use that symbolically, just like the Black Madonna is taken from that same mythology. Shows you how it all goes together. Requesting the latter's urgent support from the king of Kush, this Apepi sent out to Avaris to support a threat against supposed by Kamos activities in both of their kingdoms. Kamos promptly ordered a detachment of his troops to occupy the Bahariya Aria oasis in the Libyan desert to control the desert route to the south. So that's the sneaky part, was they were going to try to, instead of come down the Nile, which would have been figured out, they were going to run and go around the other side. But they found this message, supposedly. Now, this is a story, and they tell you that it seems to be there's some story to this that's justifying them out of nowhere. And it all started because somebody said, when you kill hippos, it's a little loud down here. Could you tone that down? Hey, your stereo's a little loud. Can you turn it? No. And that's what they actually wrote happened. Everything was fine. They loved it a lot. Hey, can you turn the stereo down? That's what they're going with on this story. So, damn sure there's more to it, and we'll probably never find out what there was to make up the reality of it all. But Kamos, called the Strong, then sailed back up the Nile to Thebes for a joyous victory and celebration after what probably not much more than a surprise spoiling raid in force that caused the Hyksos off guard. And there was no challenge, it apparently, and nobody was readying for war and anything like that. So wham, caught them off guard. Even though the first attack onto it, he still couldn't get in. His year 3 is the only date attested for Kamos, and he may have died shortly after the battle from wounds. By the end of the reign of Apepi, perhaps the second to last Hyksos king of the 15th dynasty, the Hyksos had been routed out from the Middle Egypt and retreated northward and regrouped in the vicinity of the entrance of the Fayum at Atfe. This 15th dynasty pharaoh had outlived his first Egyptian contemporary, Senecretao II, which looks like he got killed in the battle, and was still on the throne, albeit a much of a reduced kingdom, but he was still there. Theirs wasn't, and they had to switch. At the end of Kamos' reign, the last Hyksos ruler of the 15th dynasty, Kamudi, undoubtedly had a relatively short reign that fell within the first half of the reign of Ahmose I, Egyptian, Kamos' successor and the founder of the 18th dynasty. And I think it was 11 years before they caused the final set of attacks and they're kicked out of there. Or at least they put to the idea that Kamudi was there for that long. Under Ahmose, who is regarded as the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, that's the famous dynasty that contains King Tut and everything else, it may have been on the Theban throne for some time before he resumed war against the Hyksos. The details of this military campaign are taken from the account on the walls of the tomb of Ahmose, son of Ibana, a soldier from El Kab, a town in southern Egypt, whose father had served under Senkartao, and whose family had long been nomarchs of the districts, known through periods in time, so they can trust this to be at least as good of a story as you're going to get. It seems that several campaigns, citation needed, campaigns against the stronghold at Avaris were needed before the Hyksos were finally dislodged and driven out of Lower Egypt, like more than 11 years. But when this occurred, it is not only with certainty that some authorities placed the expulsion as early as Ahmose's 4th year, while Donald Redford and those chronicles structure have been adopted here, places it as late as the king's 15th year. So there's a big discrepancy in there too, of 10 and 15 years, and you figure out how many dynasties they had and ones that floated over each other totally sometimes. It's quite odd. Here's one of those new style of axes, and it is showing the Egyptians kicking out the Hyksos, and it says it right here. But here's a griffin. Isn't that odd? Because that symbology would have maybe brought in with these people, but it sure isn't Egyptian, is it? Ahmose, who left the inscription, states that he followed on foot as his king Ahmose rode to war in his chariot, the first mention of the use of the horse and chariot by the Egyptians. Even though the Hyksos had been here at the time, this is the first time they apparently had used them on anybody, and they use it towards taking over the other part, or back over the other part. In the fighting around Avaris, he captured prisoners and carried off several hands. These are when they kill somebody, they cut off their hand, and they use it as proof of slain enemies, which are reported to the Royal Herald, resulting as being awarded the Gold of Valor on 3 separate occasions. The actual fall of Avaris is only briefly mentioned. It's kind of like getting your medal or something, but you get well noted if you did well in battle and got a bunch of hands. Like you hear about the Bible, them getting foreskins for the god and everything and all this type of stuff. Then Avaris was despoiled. Then I carried off the spoil from there, 1 man, 3 women, and a total of 4 persons. Then his majesty gave them to me as slaves. This is what was said by him. And so they took over the Avarians, and then they took them as slaves for themselves. After the fall of Avaris, The fleeing Hyksos were pursued by the Egyptian army across the northern Sinai Peninsula through the Sea of Reeds and into the southern Levant. Here in the Negev desert between Rafah and Gaza, the fortified town of Shahurin was reduced, according to the soldier from El Kab, after 3-year siege operation. How soon after the sack of Avaris this Asiatic campaign took place is really uncertain. One can reasonably conclude that the thrust of the southern Canaan probably followed the Hyksos eviction from Avaris fairly closely, but given a period of protracted struggle before Avaris fell, and probably more than one season of campaigning before the Hyksos were shut up in Shahurin, and the chronological sequence must remain uncertain. We're getting towards the end here, people. How much time do I got? 10 minutes? Should do it. The Hyksos continued to play a role in Egyptian literature as a synonym for Asiatics down to Hellenistic times. The term was frequently invoked against such groups as the Semites, settled in Aswan or the Delta. This may have led to the Egyptian priest and historian Manetho, Ptolemaeus, or the Manalesian, to identify the coming of the Hyksos with the sojourn in Egypt of Joseph and his brothers, led to some authorities identifying the expulsion of the Hyksos with the Exodus. For instance, Justin Martyr himself says Moses is mentioned as a leader and a ruler of the Jewish people, or Jewish nation. In this way, he is mentioned by both Polemon in the first book of his Hellenics and by Aprion, son of Poseidonus, and in his book against the Jews, and in the fourth book of his history, where he says that during the reign of Inachus over Agros, the Jews revolted from Amasis, king of the Egyptians, and that Moses led them. And Ptolemaeus of Mendelesion, relating the history of Egypt, concurs in all of this. So there's another connection and correlation. With the chaos at the end of the 19th dynasty, the first pharaohs of the 20th dynasty in the Elephantine Stele and the Harris Papyrus reinvigorated an anti-Hyksos stance to strengthen their nativist reaction towards the Asiatic settlers of the north, who may have again have been expelled from the country. Sinacht, the founder of the 20th dynasty, records in a year 2 stele from Elephantine that he defeated the expelled large force of Asiatics who had invaded Egypt during the chaos between the end of Tuasret's reign and the beginning of the 20th dynasty, and captured much of their stolen gold and silver booty. So some had infiltrated back in, or another expulsion happened to a smaller group. It's believed that this second smaller group is the one I was talking about earlier when it talked about the different reigns that they thought may have gone on with Manetho and all that type of stuff, and Josephus. The story of the Hyksos was known to the Greeks, who attempted to identify it within their own mythology with the expulsion from Egypt of Belos, or Baal, and the daughters of Danos, associated with the origin of the Argive dynasty in Argos in elder times. And it puts it right aligned with that. And you can see Israelites, Mitanni, Cass, Sea Peoples, Hittites, Philistines, Marianu, but here is all of the citations that they have brought here. I don't bring other citations, I bring it as a citation. Quite often I'll just tell you it's in a scroll, or it's in this, or it's in that, and here are the references. So this has gotten quite extensive on the Hyksos here, and shows you quite a bit of it. It also shows you that Josephus himself relegated that that's who they were. And here's even a scarab with the name of a Pepe on it that's over here. So anyhow, that is a special that's on the Hyksos. Here's the dynasty and the way that it looked there. The Hyksos at their maximum were up to the point here of the Abydos type dynasties, but Thebes being way up in here, they always had their area overtaken, or not overtaken, and then way farther up the cataract became the kingdom of Kush, which came down. But here's Kerma, way down low, and even around this bend and further down is what was considered impassable by the Nubians. They said they could not come past Het forever and ever. So anyhow, so that's early in the Hyksos period and where they had come to their farthest extent, and then they backed off into really just running the delta. But in running the delta, it seems like they told them that, well, all our cattle get done down there and y'all make all our food. You know that, right? So they had them pretty much, like they say, in a satiated idea that they weren't a problem with. Satiated. Sace? Does that got anything to do with its origin? No, well, anyhow. Satiated. And they were okay with it, except for that ruler turned around and something went wrong. And it's all told because he said hippos make too much noise. And it's real doubtful there were any hippos in this area. But up through here there were still some, and they would come down every once in a while. But there ain't no way you could have heard a hippo 200, 300 yards away, much less 300 kilometers away. Like, share, and subscribe, guys, and enjoy. And we're going to get on to a next part of this. Hopefully this shows you that. But this shows the definite part of the Hurrians and other Proto-Indo-European type people that came in. And they say that at least they were the rulers of it. And that it looks like it was Aryans that were the rulers of them in some way or form. So you'd say, well, there comes the blonde people, but I just showed you that they were there, and blue-eyed people from the earliest pre-dynastic times. And so a snake comes around and bites his own tail. We're going to get on with it now, and I'm going to start doing the King Tut one, and it should be more interesting and a little bit more clip-happy, showing you pictures. Although the first time that I tried to do it, I had a bunch of clips, and when putting them together, they got flagged like crazy. I tried to do an edit like I've done before and suck it out, and it was getting edited again. But then I found another show that talked about the same thing. It appears to be filmed a little better, and I'm going to redo the thing entirely, but really pretty much try to stop frame it through the parts and talk about it, and have very little seconds of their interaction on it, and see if that makes it, and I sure hope it does. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, guys. Leave a comment down below and tell me what you think about the Hyksos and what you may have found. Peace.